Welcome to Daily Life in the Past. Here, we explore how ordinary people lived before modern technology and comfort shaped everyday life. If you enjoy learning about the past, feel free to leave a comment and let us know where you are watching from. And if you would like to support the channel, a like or subscription is always appreciated. Sound is one of the fastest ways humans learn what is happening around them. It warns, guides, and organizes daily life. But the way noise and silence felt in the past was not the same as it feels today. Before engines, electronics, and constant media, many places were quieter in a steady background way. At the same time, older towns and crowded streets could be extremely loud in short bursts, with sharp sounds that carried far. To understand historical sound and silence, it helps to think in three simple parts: the sources of sound, the spaces that shaped sound, and the habits people built around listening. First, the sources. In the past, most sound came from humans, animals, weather, and simple tools. A city did not have car traffic, sirens, and air conditioners. It did have footsteps, carts, wagons, horses, bells, voices, metal striking metal, and the steady work sounds of craftspeople. A countryside did not have highway hum or distant jets. It did have wind in trees, insects, frogs, birds, and the sounds of farm work. Second, the spaces. Sound behaves differently depending on walls, streets, and building materials. Many pre-modern cities had narrow streets and tall buildings close together. Stone and plaster reflected sound, and tight streets could turn a single shout into an echoing corridor. In contrast, open fields, forests, and wide valleys spread sounds out. A bell or horn might carry far, but ordinary speech could disappear quickly into the open air. Third, the habits of listening. People trained themselves to notice different things. They learned time by ear, learned weather by ear, and learned danger by ear. In many places, there was no single, accurate personal clock. People often depended on shared signals, bells, calls, and daily patterns. In early towns and villages across Europe, bells were among the most important sound tools. Church bells marked hours, prayer times, warnings, and community events. Over many centuries, bell sounds helped organize both religious and civic life. In a world with fewer written notices and slower communication, a loud, recognizable signal made coordination possible. Bells could tell people when the workday began, when gates closed, or when a meeting was called. Bells could also signal emergencies like fire. As a result, the sound of a bell was not just noise. It was information, and it often carried authority. Mechanical clocks did not first matter, because people could see a clock face. Early public clocks mattered because they could strike the time so the sound reached many people at once. For daily routine, the audible time signal could be more useful than a dial that only a few people could view. In that setting, knowing the time often meant hearing it, but not all city sound was organized and official. Markets were loud on purpose. Street sellers depended on being heard. Over centuries in cities like London, hawkers used repeated calls to advertise food and goods. Their cries created a moving layer of sound that shifted by neighborhood and hour. People learned to recognize what was being sold by the rhythm and tone of a call, sometimes even before words were clear. Sound acted like a map. You could locate work, trade, and activity by ear. In pre-industrial streets, sound was also physical. Horse hooves on stone or packed earth, wagon wheels, and iron fittings created hard, bright noise. Tools in workshops, hammering, sawing, scraping, often traveled from open doors to the street. Many trades worked close to the public, so the boundary between workplace sound and street sound was thin. Compared to modern cities, there were fewer sounds that stayed constant all day and night. Today, many neighborhoods have an ongoing background: engines, fans, traffic flow, electronics, and distant infrastructure. In many older towns, sound often came in waves. The street could be busy and loud at certain hours, then become much quieter when work ended, markets closed, and people went indoors. Night sounded different in the past. Before electric lighting, many people limited movement after dark. That did not mean everyone slept early, but it often meant fewer people traveled far, fewer businesses operated late, and fewer public activities continued. Sound at night could drop suddenly, especially in smaller towns and rural areas. Silence, however, is not the same as no sound. Even in places that felt quiet, there were always natural and human signals: wind, rain, distant animals, wood settling, and occasional voices. What changed was the amount of competing sound. When fewer layers overlapped, a single sound became more noticeable. A cough in a quiet room, a step on a wooden floor, or a distant dog could feel unusually clear. That clarity shaped awareness. In a modern home, many people live with a steady blanket of noise: appliances, ventilation, street traffic, and digital devices. In a quieter setting, small changes mattered more. People could notice a cart approaching earlier, identify who was walking by the pattern of steps, or hear a door opening from farther away. Quiet increased the range of attention. It also shaped privacy. In many historical homes, walls were thin and multiple people shared rooms. At the same time, the outside environment could be quieter than today. That created a mixed situation. Outdoor quiet might make indoor sounds carry farther, while crowded living conditions reduced personal privacy inside. In a village, neighbors might recognize household activity by sound: chopping, washing, a baby crying, or voices late at night. Rural soundscapes had their own patterns. In daylight, the countryside could be full of constant natural sound: birds at dawn, insects in warm seasons, wind through crops, and the movement of animals. Farm work added regular human-made sound: tools hitting wood, scythes cutting, animals being led, and wagons moving between fields. At night, rural areas could become strikingly different. Without electric light, the horizon was darker. People often relied more on hearing to sense distance, direction, and presence. Natural sounds could be comforting markers, like insects in summer, or they could become strong reminders of isolation during storms or in winter. In many places, the quiet of a cold night could feel bigger because fewer insects and fewer people were active. Weather strongly shaped historical listening. Rain on thatch, tile, or wood had different tones. Wind in shutters and chimneys changed with building design. Thunder had no competition from airplanes or traffic. In coastal areas, waves and wind formed a steady base layer that could guide routine. These were not special effects. They were daily sensory information. Cities and towns also used sound for control and regulation. Curfew bells, for example, could signal a time when daily activity should slow or stop. In some places, the bell tradition continued long after the original legal meaning weakened. The important point is that sound could act as a public rule that everyone could hear at once, even if few people could read official notices. Sound also organized labor. Factories later added a new kind of regular noise, but even earlier work often relied on signals. Bells, horns, and shouted calls could coordinate groups: when to gather, when to start, when to stop, and when to respond to danger. As industrialization expanded in the 18th and 19th centuries, the sound picture changed again. New machines introduced continuous, powerful noise, and growing cities packed more people and traffic into tight spaces. Coal deliveries, factories, rail systems, and crowded streets added a new thickness to urban sound. In older pre-industrial cities, loudness often came from specific sources at specific moments. In industrial cities, some loudness became persistent. The new sound was not only louder, it was more constant. This mattered for how people experience silence. When constant noise becomes normal, quiet can feel unusual. When quiet is normal, sudden noise stands out sharply. Public health and comfort concerns about noise increased over time as cities modernized. By the early 20th century, people began measuring and managing sound more systematically. New technologies like microphones, sound meters, and acoustic design methods made sound a technical problem that could be studied and controlled. Buildings and public spaces were redesigned with listening in mind, especially in places like concert halls, offices, and theaters. At the same time, governments and city leaders sometimes treated noise as an issue of public order. Complaints about street sounds, horns, amplified music, and nighttime disturbance led to rules meant to reduce unnecessary noise. These efforts show that by then, many people expected a different relationship between city life and quiet. Noise was no longer only a byproduct of work and trade, it was something that could be limited. To compare historical silence to modern silence, it helps to separate two ideas: the amount of sound and the meaning of sound. The amount of sound depended on technology and population density. Without motors and electronics, many places had lower average sound levels. But crowds, animals, stone streets, and metal tools could still create very loud moments. The meaning of sound depended on what a sound signaled. A bell might mean time, warning, or authority. A street cry might mean food nearby. Hooves might mean delivery or travel. In a quieter environment, each sound carried more information because it was less likely to be covered by other sounds. This also shaped attention and memory. People often remembered places by their sound patterns: the sound of a marketplace, the sound of a river, the sound of a church bell at a certain hour, or the sound of a workshop street. Sound helped build a mental schedule. Daily routines were often designed around predictable sound cues. Morning work could begin with daylight and a bell. Meals might be tied to shared signals. Evening quiet might be tied to curfew customs, closing of gates, or simply the limits of dark travel. Without bright streetlights and 24-hour infrastructure, the day's sound usually had clearer edges. Inside buildings, materials mattered. Many homes used wood, plaster, stone, and textiles. Hard surfaces reflected sound, soft materials absorbed it. Thick stone walls could block outside noise, but small windows and tight spaces could also concentrate indoor echoes. In crowded housing, people learned to live with each other's sounds and to interpret them. Religious spaces had a special sound role. Large churches and cathedrals created long reverberation. Words and music behaved differently there than in a small room or open field. People did not just hear a service, they experienced sound filling a space. This shaped how communities connected sound with seriousness, authority, and shared identity. Military and emergency signals also mattered. Before modern communication systems, alarms had to be simple and loud. Bells, drums, horns, and shouted warnings were common solutions. These were not constant sounds, but when they happened, they changed behavior quickly. Transportation created another major shift in sound over time. In a world of walking and animal power, speed was lower, and the distance of warning was often longer. You could hear a wagon approach. With trains and later cars, speed increased and new mechanical sounds appeared. The rhythm of movement changed. So did the kinds of listening needed to stay safe. Another difference between then and now is how much sound was chosen versus unavoidable. Today, many people choose sound through headphones, music, and constant media. In the past, much public sound was shared and unavoidable: a bell, a market call, a nearby craft, or a neighbor's activity. Personal control over sound was smaller. That made the community soundscape more powerful. Silence also carried different social meanings. In some settings, quiet could signal respect, seriousness, or discipline. In others, Silence could signal absence, distance, or danger. In a small community where most sounds were recognizable, an unexpected quiet could be meaningful. If a usual bell did not ring, if a market sound was missing, or if animals were unusually still, people could notice. It is also important to remember that historical soundscapes were not the same everywhere. A fishing village, a mountain town, a desert settlement, and a major port city all sounded different. Even within one city, sound shifted by neighborhood, near docks, near markets, near religious centers, near workshops, or near wealthy housing. Seasons changed the sound picture too. Summer brought insects and open windows. Winter brought more indoor living, different work patterns, and often quieter nights in the countryside. Snow and fog could soften sound travel. Dry air and open spaces could let sharp sounds carry farther. When we ask how noise and silence felt, we are really asking how the environment shaped attention. In many past settings, there was less constant mechanical background, so people could track subtle changes. Silence was not empty. It was a condition where smaller signals could stand out. Noise was not always chaotic. It was often organized, purposeful, and tied to work, timekeeping, and community rules. Over the long run, the biggest changes came from three forces: urban growth, industrial power, and electronic media. Urban growth increased overlapping human activity. Industrial power added continuous machine sound and faster transport. Electronic media added sound that could travel without a person or animal making it in that moment. As these changes spread, the line between day and night sound blurred. Work and travel extended later. Streets stayed active longer. The modern world became louder, not only in peaks, but in averages. So the key difference is not simply that the past was quieter. It is that sound was more directly tied to physical place, human timing, and shared signals. Silence was more common in many settings, which made individual sounds sharper and more informative. And noise, when it arrived, often arrived with clear meaning: time, trade, labor, warning, or gathering. Understanding these older sound patterns helps explain daily life before modern infrastructure. People did not just live in buildings and streets. They lived inside sound schedules. Their awareness, routine, and sense of place were shaped by what they could hear, when they could hear it, and how quickly sound traveled through the spaces around them. In that world, listening was not a background skill. It was a basic tool for staying oriented in time, staying connected to community rules, and staying aware of what was happening nearby. The past sounded different because life was organized differently, and because silence itself played a larger role in what people noticed and how they moved through each day.